The penthouse air in Gangnam was always 5 degrees colder than the street below. A calculated chill that mirrored the man who lived within its glass walls. Zendaya adjusted the strap of her leather kit, her fingers tracing the sharp, jagged edge of a tailor's chalk as she stepped off the elevator. She had been warned by the handlers that Wu Jin did not like to be touched, nor did he like to wait. Time, in his world, was a currency paid in blood or silence. As the doors slid open with a silent, predatory hiss, she was met not by a man, but by a silhouette. He stood against the floor-to-ceiling glass, the Seoul skyline bleeding neon blues and reds across his broad shoulders. He didn't turn. He didn't acknowledge the rhythmic, confident click of her heels on the polished black marble. Zendaya set her kit down, her breath hitching as she took in the sheer expanse of his back. He was a man built of straight lines and hard edges, wearing a white shirt that looked like it had been molded onto his frame by a master sculptor. 3 minutes late, he said. His voice was a low, gravelly vibration that seemed to travel through the floorboards rather than the air. It was a voice accustomed to ending lives and starting wars. Zendaya didn't apologize. She had learned early in her career that men like Wu Jin smelled apology like a scent of blood. Instead, she draped a measuring tape around her neck and stepped directly into his personal space, a move that would have made a seasoned assassin hesitate. The scent of sandalwood and something sharp and metallic, perhaps gun oil, perhaps old coins, hit her. It was intoxicating and inherently dangerous. She pulled a swatch of charcoal wool from her bag, holding it up to the dim light. "The charcoal will absorb the light," she said, her voice steady, despite the frantic hammering in her chest. "It makes you look like a shadow. People fear what they can't quite see." Finally, Wu Jin turned. His eyes were not the cold, dead voids she had expected. They were intelligent, piercing, and currently fixed on her with a clinical intensity that felt like a physical weight. He looked at her dark skin, the sharp lines of her blazer, and the way she refused to lower her gaze. A ghost of a smirk played at the corner of his mouth, the first sign of life she had seen in him. It was the look of a man who had finally found a puzzle worth solving. He didn't move as she stepped closer to measure his inseam. The tension in the room was thick enough to be sliced with her shears. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a stark contrast to the chilled air of the penthouse. Every time her knuckles brushed his skin, a small spark of electricity jolted through her, a reminder of the volatility of their proximity. He was the most powerful man in the city, a ghost who pulled the strings of the underworld. Yet here he was, letting a girl from Brooklyn decide how the world would perceive his majesty. She reached up to measure his shoulders, her face inches from his. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. Just as she was about to pull away, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with a strength that was terrifying, yet strangely controlled. His eyes searched hers for a flicker of fear. He found only curiosity. Slowly, he released her, his gaze dropping to the small silver locket hanging from her neck. "Don't get too close, Zendaya," he whispered. "You might see something you can't unsee." The next 3 weeks were a choreographed dance of silence and silk. Zendaya became a permanent fixture in the Dragon's Den, as the locals called Wu Jin's headquarters. She wasn't just a stylist anymore. She was a sculptor, molding the public image of a king. She chose fabrics that didn't wrinkle under the pressure of a shoulder holster, and colors that hid the stain of wine, or worse. Wu Jin was a man of few words, but his silence was a language she was beginning to translate with startling accuracy. A twitch of the jaw meant he was displeased with a deal. A subtle, almost imperceptible lean toward her meant he was listening to her opinion on more than just lapel widths. She was pinning the hem of a midnight blue tuxedo when the heavy oak doors of the study burst open. A man drenched in sweat and terror stumbled in, followed by two of Wu Jin's silent, stone-faced enforcers. Zendaya didn't move. She kept her head down, her fingers steady as she pushed a pin through the heavy, expensive wool. She felt Wu Jin's body stiffen beneath her hand, the muscles in his shoulder turning to iron. He didn't even look at the intruder. He kept his eyes fixed on her reflection in the full-length mirror, watching the way her dark fingers moved against the fabric. "Out," the intruder gasped, pointing a trembling, sweaty finger at Zendaya. "She shouldn't be here for this. This is family business." Wu Jin didn't even turn around. He reached out and placed a hand on Zendaya's shoulder, a gesture that was both a shield and a claim of ownership. "She stays," he said, his voice like cracking ice on a frozen lake. "She is the only one in this room who knows how to keep a secret. Now, tell me why the docks are empty, and why my cargo is sitting in a warehouse that isn't mine." Zendaya felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. The air grew heavy with the scent of impending violence. She continued her work, her movements methodical and rhythmic, though her heart was drumming a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs. She was a ghost in the room, a fly on the wall of a world she had no business inhabiting, yet she felt a strange, intoxicating sense of belonging. As the man stammered out a pathetic explanation about a hijacked shipment and rival gangs, Zendaya noticed something that chilled her more than the conversation. Wu Jin wasn't looking at the man pleading for his life. He was looking at her hands. He was fascinated by her calm, by the way she didn't flinch when the man was dragged out by his collar, screaming for mercy that would never come. When the doors finally closed, the silence that returned was different. It was intimate, heavy with the weight of shared secrets. Wu Jin looked down at her, his hand still resting on her shoulder. The heat of his palm seeped through her shirt, grounding her. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "You didn't run," he noted, a question hidden in the statement. "I've seen monsters before, Wu Jin," she replied, finally looking up. "Most of them wear suits that fit much worse than yours." He laughed then, a short, dry sound that felt like a rare gift. But as he turned back to the window, she noticed a small, dark smudge on the cuff of his white shirt. It wasn't ink. It wasn't wine. It was a single, perfect drop of fresh blood that hadn't been there a moment ago. The blood on the cuff was never mentioned, but it changed the molecular structure of their relationship. Zendaya began to notice the subtle, jagged cracks in Wu Jin's iron facade. He was a man who slept 4 hours a night, who drank tea like it was a bitter medicine, and who looked at his own reflection with a quiet, simmering hatred that made her heart ache. One evening, as she was organizing his tie collection, she found him sitting in the dark of his library, a glass of amber liquid untouched on the table beside him. He looked smaller in the shadows, less like a god of the underworld, and more like a man drowning in a sea of his own making. The weight of his crown was visible in the slump of his shoulders. "Why do you do it?" she asked, stepping into the room. She didn't turn on the light. The moonlight through the window was enough to highlight the sharp planes of his face. "Do what?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Live like this. In a fortress of silk and stone, waiting for someone to find a flaw in the armor. You spend every waking moment preparing for a strike that hasn't come yet. Wu Jin stood up, his movements fluid and dangerous, like a panther sensing a threat. He walked toward her until she was backed against the heavy mahogany shelves. He didn't touch her, but he didn't need to. His presence was an embrace in itself, overwhelming and absolute. Because the moment I stop being a monster, I become a victim. In this world, Zendaya, there is no middle ground. You are either the hand that holds the blade or the throat that feels it. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness that terrified her. His touch was unexpectedly soft, a jarring contrast to the words he had just spoken. Zendaya felt a surge of something she couldn't name, a mixture of fear, pity, and a growing, dangerous attraction. She knew she should leave. She should take her kit and run back to the safety of the fashion world, where the only thing at stake was a season's reputation. But she was drawn to the darkness in him, to the way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world of illusions. "You're not a monster," she whispered, her hand rising to cover his, feeling the calluses on his palms. "You're just a man who has forgotten how to be anything else. You've been wearing the suit for so long you've forgotten the skin underneath." He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. For a moment, the world outside, the hits, the deals, the betrayals, ceased to exist. There was only the sound of their breathing and the scent of expensive fabric and raw, unfiltered tension. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound that broke Zendaya's heart. He was leaning on her, physically and emotionally, a power shift that terrified them both. The moment was shattered by the buzzing of his phone. He pulled away instantly, the mask slamming back into place so fast it made her dizzy. "You need to leave," he said, his voice cold and professional again. "Now." A week passed in the deafening silence that felt like a physical weight. Zendaya spent her days in her studio, staring at sketches that suddenly felt meaningless and hollow. The vibrant colors of her fabric seemed dull and lifeless compared to the stark blacks and grays of Wu Jin's world. She told herself she was glad to be away, that the danger was too high, but her hands shook every time she picked up a needle. She was hooked on the high-wire act of being near him, on the way he looked at her, like she was a puzzle he was both desperate and afraid to solve. She missed the scent of sandalwood and the cold air of the penthouse. On the 8th day, a black sedan appeared outside her shop, the windows tinted to a deep, impenetrable black. The driver didn't say a word. He simply held the door open with a robotic precision. Zendaya didn't hesitate. She grabbed her kit and stepped inside, knowing she was crossing a line she could never uncross. The drive was longer than usual, taking her away from the glitz of Gangnam and toward the industrial outskirts of the city, where the smoke of factories choked the stars. They pulled into a nondescript warehouse, the rusted gates groaning as they closed behind them like the jaws of a trap. Inside, the space was vast and cold, filled with the hum of generators and the smell of grease. Wu Jin was there, but he wasn't the man she remembered. He was dressed in a simple black tactical turtleneck and slacks, his hair uncharacteristically messy and his eyes bloodshot. He was standing over a table covered in architectural blueprints and maps of the city. When he saw her, his eyes softened for a fraction of a second before returning to their usual hardness. "I have a gala tonight," he said, as if they were back in the safety of the penthouse. "A public appearance. I need to look untouchable. I need to look like I've already won." Zendaya walked to him, her eyes scanning the warehouse and the armed men standing in the shadows. "This doesn't look like a dressing room, Wu Jin." "It's a fortress," he replied. "The penthouse is compromised. There's a leak in the family, Zendaya. Someone is selling my movements to the Japanese syndicates. They want my head on a platter before the sun rises." She felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "Then why go to a gala? You're walking into an ambush." "I am the trap," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that made the hair on her arms stand up. "I need you to fix my vest. It's too heavy. It ruins the line of the tuxedo. If they see the bulge of the Kevlar, they'll know I'm expecting them. I need to look vulnerable to draw them out of the shadows. I need you to sew the armor into the suit." The night of the gala felt like a funeral procession through the heart of the city. Zendaya watched the news from a secure, windowless location, her eyes glued to the grainy footage of the red carpet. There he was, Wu Jin, looking every bit the untouchable monarch she had created with her own hands. He moved through the crowd with a predatory grace, his midnight blue suit catching the light exactly as she had intended. He looked invincible, a god among men. But she knew the truth. She knew the weight of the Kevlar against his ribs, and the fear he was masking with every polite, cold nod. She could almost feel the tightness of the stitches she had hidden in his lapels. Hours passed like centuries in that small room. Every time the news flashed a breaking update, her heart stopped. She found herself pacing the small space, her mind replaying every touch, every whispered word they had shared. She realized with a jolt of terror that she was no longer an observer. She was entangled in his life, her own safety now tied to a man who lived by the sword and expected to die by it. She wasn't just his stylist, she was his confidant, his secret weapon, and perhaps his greatest weakness. She was the one who had made the armor that would either save him or become his shroud. Just after midnight, the door to the safe house creaked open. Zendaya grabbed a heavy glass vase, her muscles tensed for a fight she couldn't win. But it was Wu Jin. He stumbled in, his tuxedo torn at the shoulder, his face pale and smeared with soot and something darker. He didn't say a word. He just collapsed onto the sofa, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Zendaya dropped the vase and ran to him, her hands searching for wounds. "Wu Jin, are you hurt? Talk to me." "Just tired," he managed to say, his eyes fluttering. He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw raw, unfiltered emotion in his eyes. It was a mix of relief and something much deeper, an obsession that had finally taken root in the ruins of the night. He reached out and pulled her down to him, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He held her with a desperation that was almost painful, his hands gripping her waist as if she were the only thing keeping him from drifting away into the dark. "It's over," he whispered. "The leak is gone. But the war is just beginning. They know I have a heart now." Zendaya held him, her fingers stroking his hair, feeling the pulse in his neck. She felt a shift in the power dynamic. He was the boss, the man who commanded armies, yet here he was, seeking solace in her arms. But then, as her hand brushed her kid on the floor, she saw something. A device she had found in the lining of his old jacket weeks ago and forgotten. A device that was currently glowing with a soft blue light. The device sat on the coffee table, a small black rectangle that felt like a live bomb. Zendaya looked from the device to Wu Jin's face, which had transformed back into the terrifying mask of the Mafia boss. The intimacy of the previous moment vanished, replaced by a tension so sharp it felt like a physical blade between them. "I found it," she said, her voice shaking. "In your your charcoal suit. 2 weeks ago. I thought it was yours. A tracker or something. I forgot I even had it until just now." Wu Jin didn't speak. He picked up the device with a gloved hand, his eyes narrowed into slits. He pressed a sequence on the side, and a small screen flickered to life, casting a ghostly glow on his face. He scrolled through lines of encrypted data, his jaw tightening, until the bone looked like it might snap. Zendaya watched him, a sense of impending doom rising in her throat. She had found his darkest secret, though she didn't know the depth of it yet. "This isn't a tracker," he said, his voice a low, dangerous hum that made the room feel smaller. "It's a ledger, a digital record of every payment made by my family to the Seoul Metropolitan Police and international authorities over the last 10 years. But it's more than that. It's the Ghost Program, a list of people my father paid to have disappeared, not killed, but relocated and given new identities. People who were supposed to be dead, but were actually being kept as leverage against the world." He turned the device toward her, his eyes fixed on hers. "Look at the names, Zendaya." Her eyes scanned the list. Names of politicians, rival bosses, and then a name she recognized. Her breath left her body in a sudden, violent rush. There, near the bottom of the list, was her own father's name, Marcus Vance. The man who had allegedly died in a warehouse fire in New York 15 years ago. The man whose death had sent her and her mother into a spiral of poverty and grief that had defined her entire existence. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why is my father on this list? He died in New York. I saw the ruins." Wu Jin stood up, his presence towering over her. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and something that looked like guilt. "Your father didn't die in that fire, Zendaya. He was a witness to a shipment my father was moving through the Brooklyn docks. My father didn't kill him. He bought him. He gave him a new life, a new name, and a bank account in Switzerland, on the condition that he never contact his family again. He used your grief as a guarantee of his silence." Zendaya felt the world tilting. Her entire life, her struggles, her career, her very identity, was built on a lie manufactured by the family of the man she was falling in love with. "You knew," she hissed. "You've known since the day you hired me. I was just a project, a way to keep the secret close." "I didn't know," Wu Jin said, but the words felt hollow and thin. He reached for her, but she recoiled, as if his touch were poison. "I knew there was a connection. I saw the locket you wear. It has my father's crest on the inside of the casing. I hired you to see if you were a threat sent by the past. I didn't know he was actually still alive until I saw this ledger tonight. I thought you were the daughter of a ghost." Zendaya backed away, her mind racing through 15 years of memories that were now stained with the shadow of the man standing before her. "You're lying. You've been watching me. This wasn't a coincidence. None of it was. The fittings, the gala, the safe house. It was all a game to see how much I knew." "It started that way," Wu Jin admitted, his voice cracking with an emotion he couldn't hide. "But it didn't stay that way. Zendaya, listen to me. My father is the one who did this. I am trying to destroy everything he built because of things like this. That list. It's the fuel I need to burn it all down, including him. By keeping me close? By making me love you while you held the key to my father's grave?" She was screaming now, the pain of 15 years of mourning turning into a sharp, jagged rage. She grabbed her kit, her hands trembling so violently she could barely zip it shut. "I'm leaving. I'm taking this ledger, and I'm going to the police. I'm going to find the man who sold my life for a new one. Wu Jin moved with a speed that blurred. He was at the door before she could reach it, his hand flat against the wood. You can't. If you leave with that, my family's cleaners will kill you before you reach the corner. And if you find your father, he won't be the man you remember. He chose to leave Zendaya. He took the money. He took the life of a coward over the love of a daughter. I don't believe you. He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were desperate, pleading. Then look at the final column on the ledger. The monthly payments. They haven't stopped, Zendaya. He's been taking money from my family for 15 years, while you worked 3 jobs to pay for design school. He didn't just leave. He sold you for a monthly check. The silence that followed was deafening. Zendaya felt the rage drain out of her, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness that was worse than the anger. She looked down at the device. The numbers were there. The dates. The bank accounts. Every month, on the 15th, a deposit was made. Her father was an employee of the monster. She slumped against the door, the weight of the betrayal crushing the air from her lungs. Wu Jin knelt in front of her, his hands hovering near her but not touching. I'm sorry, he whispered. I wanted to find a way to tell you. I wanted to be the one to give him back to you. I couldn't lose the only person who looks at me like I'm a man. She looked at him, her eyes red and hard. You are a monster, Wu Jin. You just wear better suits. He stood up and set a handgun on the table. The car is outside. The ledger is yours. The gun is for anyone who tries to stop you. Go find him. But know that once you walk out that door, I can't protect you anymore. Zendaya didn't take the gun. She took the ledger and her kit, walking out into the cold morning air without looking back. The drive to the address she had decrypted felt like a descent into a nightmare. It was a quiet suburb of Incheon, a place of white picket fences and manicured lawns, the last place anyone would look for a dead man. She stood outside the small blue house for a long time. She watched through the window as an older man, graying at the temples, but still possessing the same sharp jawline she saw in her own mirror, poured a cup of coffee. He looked happy. He looked at peace. There were no photos of her on his mantle, no traces of his old life. He was a ghost who had found a very comfortable, very expensive haunt. She reached for the doorbell, her finger hovering over the button. But she stopped. What would she say? What could a daughter say to a man who had sold her childhood for a quiet life in the suburbs? She realized then that Wu Jin had been right. This man wasn't her father. Her father had died in that fire. This was just a stranger living on Mafia blood money. She turned and walked back to the car. She didn't go to the police. She didn't go back to her studio. She drove to the highest point overlooking the Han River and watched the sun rise over the city. She took the ledger and threw it into the dark, swirling water. She watched it sink, taking the secrets and the truth about her father with it. She chose her own freedom over a broken past. 2 days later, Zendaya sat in her studio. The shop was closed, the for lease sign already in the window. She was packing the last of her fabrics when the bell over the door chimed. She didn't turn around. She knew the weight of the footsteps. You didn't go to the police, Wu Jin said. He was standing in the doorway, wearing a suit she hadn't made, a stiff, off-the-rack black one that made him look like a common soldier. He looked diminished, his power stripped away by his own hand. I didn't see the point, she replied, folding a piece of silk. Some secrets are better left in the dark. My father is dead, he said quietly. The family is in chaos. I gave the authorities enough evidence to bury the rest of them for life. I'm all that's left. Zendaya finally turned. He looked tired, older. but there was a flicker of something new in his eyes. A possibility. "Why are you here, Woojin?" "I have nothing left," he said. "No empire, no throne. Just a name that people fear and a life I don't know how to live." He stepped closer, stopping just outside her reach. "I came to ask for one last fitting." Zendaya looked at him for a long beat. She saw the man he was, and the man he could be. She reached into her kit and pulled out her measuring tape. "I don't work for free anymore, Woojin," she said, her voice steady. "I have nothing to pay you with," he whispered. "Good," she said, stepping into his space. She draped the tape around his neck, her fingers brushing the skin of his throat. "I'm tired of blood money. From now on, you pay in the truth." She finished her measurements and looked up into his eyes. For the first time, he didn't look away. "The charcoal wool," she said softly. "It still suits you best." He simply took her hand and held it against his heart, a silent promise in a city of lies. The story of the boss and his stylist had ended, but the story of Woojin and Zendaya was just beginning.